Anyone who has a teenager or even has vague memories of being one can remember shifting priorities when it comes to social interaction as soon as adolescence hits. Until the onset of teen years, it is typically the parents or caregivers that a child's world revolves around. This, of course, switches later to peers. This is when it comes to social interaction. These are behavior patterns we've observed, but thanks to advancements in functional MRI techniques, we can now study these behaviors as being symptoms of changes in the brain and actually understand what drives these behaviors and personality changes in teenagers. In a new study, researchers used functional MRI or fMRI to show that up to the age of 12, children find mothers' voices uniquely rewarding, with many parts of the brain triggered whenever the mother's voice is heard. But from the age of 13, instead of the mother's voice alone, teenagers start getting tuned to non-family voices, which their brain scans show they find more rewarding and engaging. Their whole brain reward circuitry gets rewired when it comes to social interactions. Instead of working on just the mother's voice, the brain circuitry at the age of 13 starts working for unfamiliar, unfamilial, and novel voices. What do these findings mean, and what exactly do they explain about human behavior? First, the study and the technology that it used. An MRI is a magnetic brain scan, a kind of medical imaging that uses magnetic fields to produce detailed images of the structure of the brain. It can detect a host of conditions from brain injury to dementia and also be used on other parts of the body to identify things like heart disease, cancer, and understand the health of all of our organs. A functional MRI or fMRI is similar, except it tracks changes in blood flow through the brain to detect which areas of the brain are getting activated. This in turn helps image functional activity of the brain. So, using fMRI, researchers can see which part of the brain lights up for what kind of stimuli and processing. Researchers from Stanford studied groups of children aged 7 to 16 and observed them with fMRI. The same team had previously done research where they found that up until the age of 12 or 13, these preteens and pre-adolescent children actually found their mothers' voices uniquely rewarding for their brain circuitry. Whenever they heard recordings of their mother's voice, different parts of their brains lit up, including reward centers, visual and emotional processing centers, and a whole mix of other complex centers that are associated with positive social interactions and rewards. Now the team split their group into those aged between 7 to 12 and then 13 to 16 and a half as two different studies. They found that adolescent and teen children no longer find their mother's voice uniquely rewarding. The same reward circuitry did not light up anymore once the kids crossed the age of 12 or 13. Instead, teenagers' brains started to get activated for all kinds of unfamiliar and novel voices that lied outside of the family. The researchers clearly noticed that the reward center of the brain, which lights up when seeking or being provided pleasure, comfort, happiness, excitement, and things like that, used to light up for the mother's voice up until the age of 12, after which this brain circuitry started to shift. And as the teenage brains matured, the reward centers were starting to get triggered by novel and new voices that don't belong in the family. Overall, adolescent brain in general was tuned in more to voices because it was more developed than younger kids. But the reward circuitry, the newer reward circuitry, was getting lit up only for newer social interactions as opposed to their mother's voices. This finding is of course very consistent with a lot of observed and even remembered behavior. Until teenage years, a child's social life basically revolves around their families. But after the age of 12 or 13, children undergo a transformation, especially socially. They are exposed more to the world and to their own rush of hormones, coupled with a rapidly developing and reorienting brain and extremely confusing social circles. They are more tuned in to the outside world as compared to what they were earlier and are venturing out of their shells, hitting the world with their frustrating, headstrong behavior, a lot of it being just wanting to be with their friends and be left alone. Our brains are really well studied and barely understood. But we have enough literature that talks about the development of the brain, how infants and children develop social and emotional cognition, how the brain grows in the first 5 years of a child's life, and then through tween years, through the onset of puberty, and through teen years. In general, we know that adolescence is characterized by more social independence and more independent thinking. In wealthier nations, there are excessive social pressures that lead to psychological changes in identity, as many Hollywood movies have caricatured regularly. When compared to children younger than 12, the teenage brain is much more expanded with and because of their social life expanding and changing. Teenagers form complex and hierarchical relationships with varying levels of sociability that children younger do not. They not only become sensitive to being accepted and rejected by peers, they also engage in accepting and rejecting behaviors. The social nature of teenage lives change and their social behavior changes accordingly with everyone in their lives. While the pressures are different in different cultures and communities, it is seen across cultures that teenagers are, difficult. A prime reason for this is their behavior, their social behavior, which is because of the development of the social brain. Previous fMRI imaging has shown vast changes in the brain during adolescence, including in the way mentalization or just thought process and cognition is done. There are cognitive strategies that get developed for social rewards and relationships while the brain is physically changing the entire time. Neuroanatomical changes occur, changes in gray matter occur, and teen brains are just basically exploding with activity, a lot of which is directed around social interaction and social cognition. For example, previous studies have shown that when adults and adolescents execute new tasks in games new to everyone, adults make fewer mistakes than adolescent brains when it comes to perspective games. In a task where a person was seeing different things because of their blocked field of vision and giving instructions for the participants to execute, teenagers could not interpret these instructions correctly and execute them according to what the other person sees. They did their tasks according to what their eyes could see because adolescent brains still lack the ability to take in another person's visual perspective and modify their behavior. The ability is still undergoing development as late as the teenage years. This extends, of course, to mental perspectives as well. Learning from others' mistakes is something that adult brains are capable of doing in general more than teenage brains. It's not a personality problem with a teenager. The brains are just learning these behaviors. A lot of difficult teen behavior is explained away by hormones, or so we think. While we were able to measure hormone levels earlier, and hormone levels do fluctuate, we are just now starting to actually measure scientifically how the brain anatomically changes during those terrible teenage years. These changes are reflected in the form of behavior. This time period is a sensitive time period for learning and teaching, as a substantial level of brain reorganizing and rewiring is occurring. Brain scans such as these, fMRI brain scans and studies such as these are also very useful to understand mental health and learning disabilities in children, as well as pronounced social impairments and neurodivergent conditions such as autism. But for now, if teenagers are barely listening to you as a parent or even as a familiar voice, and you feel like nothing is going into their ears, nothing really is, and it's technically not even their fault. To their brains, your voice is now boring, and it has been scientifically proven.